Well, guys, I'm really excited to have a very dear friend of mine chatting with me today. And she is a podcast host, a radio host, an author, a TV host, a mum, a wife, a friend, and just a kick-ass human, Maz Compton.
Elrod, this is just the best little circle of events that you and I are chatting in this season of life about what we're going to talk about on this platform because we have a rich history and I just love this so much. So thank
I
you
do too.
for your support and your time. You're wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Well, the feeling is very mutual, but I guess, yeah, on that rich history, maybe we should shed some light on what that involves exactly.
What's your version of the story?
My version is that we had a time back in the day. Obviously, yeah, we worked together at MTV. How long ago was it now?
Oh,
20?
babe. So I was trying to figure this out. So I started working at MTV mid 2004.
Okay.
And then, and you would have joined the following year, or was it? Yeah, oh
April
five.
2005. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember when they're like, "Oh, we're hiring a new VJ, and she's a model," and I'm like, "Oh, awesome! This is gonna be great fun." But when we met, like one of the first things that we did, which is so ironic considering what we're about to talk about today, but we had a few Coronas together, and that kind of became our kind of thing. Like we would do live TV together, or we'd do interviews or road shows, but we would always like get together and have drinks, and it just kind of became the currency in which we operated outside of the realms of all of those duties that we had as VJs at MTV. So the irony that we really did bond over a couple of cans back in the day to this season of life is pretty wild to me.
It is pretty wild. Yeah, I mean, like our Friday ritual after the big live show would be to literally sit in the car park
Yeah.
of our studio and like because we were classy ladies, and yeah, and sink a couple of tinnies. So we've
Yeah.
come a long way. You in
We
particular.
really have. Well, we all have.
So yes, as you said, the irony is that you've now released a book called Last Drinks.
Because those drinks in 2004 were not my last drinks. My
They
last drinks
certainly were
were
not.
a decade later in 2014. I decided to have my last drinks, and I have been sober for 8.5 years now. And it's, I feel like I want to just talk about this because I think alcohol, as we know, is such a currency. It's how we connect with people. It's how we break down barriers, and it's how we have nights out and all of that stuff. And I've just managed to do 8.5 years of my life and do all of those things without alcohol. And so I know it is possible to connect with people and to socialize and to orientate ourselves around each other without booze. And that's what I'm excited about people exploring for themselves.
Absolutely. And obviously, you go into this in Last Drinks, which is sort of part memoir and part self help guide, and really like actionable, practical advice on how to get booze out of your life. But I know you've been telling this story on the project and on morning TV, but if you wouldn't mind for our viewers, just
Yeah.
telling us your story of sobriety and how it came to be.
Yeah, 100%. And I love telling this story because, Linz, I honestly thought that my story was really unique. And then what I realized is that it's actually really common. So there I was thinking, I'm a unique snowflake with my relationship with alcohol. But the more I talk about it, the more people reach out and they're like, oh my gosh, hearing your story reminds me of where I'm at with my relationship with alcohol. And so it's so important for me to share where I was at because it wasn't leaving Las Vegas, right? It wasn't like we see in the movies. You know how like people who are alcoholics are depicted in the movies as like they lose everything and they're homeless and they have no shoes. I had loads of shoes in 2014, right?
You always
So
love shoes.
I wait, but you know what's so funny? I can't wear heels anymore because I'm old
Yeah.
and I'm a mum. And so now I just have heaps of Skechers, which is such a throwback to the 1990s. But anyway, um, in 2014 was when I really started. I had a few questions pop up for myself that caught me off guard. So 2014, killing it in the radio game, national drive show, lots of money, great contracts, flying all over the place, interviewing rock stars, just doing what I've done in my career, but on the radio platform and loving life.
Yeah.
But I was drinking every day. I wasn't drinking every day and like hating life. I was drinking every day and having a good time. But I remember one particular weekend, it was a Friday, and I did think to myself, oh God, I don't want to go to Carly's birthday because I don't want to drink.
Mhm.
And then I was like, that's a weird thing to say because why can't I go to my friend's birthday and not drink? And then I started kind of navigating around that question of like, could I go to my friend's birthday and not drink? What will people think? What will they say? What will I do instead? And so that was, I think, the start of my sober curiosity. And then it was a few events that kept popping up for me where I was like, oh, maybe is this the weekend that I decide that I'm going to try to not drink for a weekend to see how it feels? And I think I'd just gotten over being hungover. And so after a few months sitting in that space, I really was like, okay, girlfriend, let's actually put this into action. And I just decided to put on my big girl pants and fully just stop drinking for 30 days to see what it was like. Now, the difference between Maz Compton stopping drinking on the 1st of January 2015 and Maz Compton stopping drinking every July for the 8 previous years, basically, was the intention that I set. So I
Mm.
think that even though I Googled, am I an alcoholic? And according to that definition, no, I don't think I was, but I definitely had some level of dependence on alcohol. I think which wasn't helpful, by the way. Like if you're listening to this going, ooh, don't Google that. It
Yeah.
doesn't really help at all.
No.
All I knew is that I was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And so what I did, I think, in my history of drinking is I'd take a month off to prove to myself that I didn't have a problem
Mm.
because who wants to have a problem? And the difference with the 1st of January is I chose that to be the first day of my discovery of my sober self. So
Mm.
rather than deprivation and white knuckling and waiting to the first of the next month so I could have a drink, I actually was like, let's just park the booze and figure out who I am without it and if that feels and looks good for me. And I think it's because of that intention that I set at the beginning of that month. I had a really different experience to what I had in the past when I'd taken a bit of time off I can have a month off, I'm fine. But then you have a month off and then you have a year on, and so that wasn't fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you say in the book that you would have a dry July followed by a very wet August. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people can relate to that because it is this thing
Yeah.
that they do because they're raising money for charity, or maybe they are trying to prove to themselves that they don't
Yeah.
have a problem because maybe it's in the back of their head that something's not quite right, but
That's
it
right.
is just a race to the finish line and then a glass of champagne to cheers yourself because
Totally.
yeah. And so at what point on your journey, so you went into it with better intentions and for 30 days, and then obviously the 30 days turned into another 30 days and so on and so forth. At what point would you say you realized that you were never going to drink again?
To be honest, like years later. So I never when I started to not drink, I honestly, for the first 30 days, it was just for 30 days and then see what happened. And then it was, oh, well, my birthday's in March. So let's get to my birthday. And then I was like, oh, I'm at my birthday. I haven't had a drink for a few months. I'm not going to drink today. And so it was these little, like little micro goals in a way that I set along the road. And then it was like, let's get to 6 months. And then I was like, let's get to a year. And then I was like, I'm going to write a blog. And I think it was probably a couple of years in that I could honestly say, I don't think I'm going to drink again. And now I know I'm not going to drink again, but I didn't worry about telling myself that along the way because knowing myself and my passion for self-sabotage, I thought, if I say I'm not going to drink again, am I setting myself up for a fall? If I say I'm not going to drink again and then I do find that I can moderate, have I failed? And I just didn't want to go through another fail. So I think for me, just setting that intention of sobriety as a progressive revelation of self and sobriety as an ongoing adventure was easier for me to wrap my head around than doing the never nevers. And then I think that's why a lot of people, you set your New Year's Eve goals or your New Year's goals, and then on the 8th of January or something is usually the date where everyone's like, screw it. Like, I'm just going to
Yeah.
have a pizza today.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to do that with this sort of turn in sobriety. So I think the intention was a really big part of that, and not putting the pressure on myself to never drink. And then only after years of sobriety was I really comfortable with going, oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure that I'm sober now and I will be forever.
Yeah, that's amazing. I also really like that because I think when people are finding excuses not to give up alcohol, it's like, oh, but
Yeah.
it's my birthday this month, or
Yeah.
it's that work function, or but I'm going away. I like that you sort of flip that on its head, and it's like, oh no, let's get to my birthday, and okay,
Yeah.
push let's keep pushing the goalposts a little bit.
And I think, to be fair, Lynn's, like, there actually is never a good time to stop drinking.
Hmm.
Like, honestly, like when can you squeeze in sobriety? We're busy, we're exhausted, we've got so many balls in the air. There's so much going on in our lives. There is actually never a good time. So you just have to rip the Band-Aid off and decide that you're gonna go on this adventure within the confines of whatever your calendar produces for that week, and
Hmm.
just try and get it done sober. And I think that was where I was at, because my life was so micromanaged at that point with my radio show. And you know what this is like when you, like, back at MTV, you would get a call going, "Hey, you're going to France next week for the Europe Music Awards." You're like, "Okay, cool." And
Yeah.
you're not in control of a lot of your days. And we weren't in control really on what we were wearing, whether they were great outfits by a particular stylist or terrible outfits by a different one, or our
Mm.
hair and makeup, which seat we were sitting in at the side of stage live stream that we were doing at the festival. Like, there were so many things in our world that we weren't in control of. And this is why I think I lent on alcohol in those early days, because it's something I could control. The
Yeah.
irony that it all flips around and it ended up being something that was a bit out of control for me is interesting to think about. But in
Mm.
2014, again, my whole schedule was so micromanaged that I didn't feel like I had any control. So sobriety ended up being the thing that I could take control of. And I could
Mm.
go, well, this is my thing now. Like, because my life is so planned, like, let me have a say in this. I'm not drinking any drinks today.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because I think I didn't realize when we were at MTV, obviously I realized that, yeah, we were told sort of what to wear and even kind of given personas, even if it wasn't
Yes,
necessarily aligned to who we actually were. But in your
absolutely.
book,
Yes.
you spoke about the criticism that you faced for things, like skin and just, all this kind of stuff that I don't think I really realized was happening at the
Mm.
at the time. And it sort of made me think about that whole experience a little differently as well, and how different it would be if it played out now,
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
later. But it's kind of like, well, yeah, like, of course we're going to drink. It's just kind of like, also, I mean, I was thinking about this one retreat that we went on, and you speak about this in your book as well, where it was like drinking was something that we were praised for. It's like she can drink beers with the boys and cocktails with the girls,
Yeah.
like I remember interviewing Dave Grohl and having beers with Dave Grohl and like, oh yeah, she's drinking beers with Dave Grohl, like she's a cool
Yeah.
girl thing. It was so, yeah, something that you were really encouraged to do and praised for. And it was in that culture of where we worked as well, because there was that one retreat where we went down south. Everyone got absolutely blotto. The next day, the whole, like, the CEO, do you remember? He had to leave mid
Yeah.
presentation to go vomit.
Yeah.
He was so hungover, and it was like, what a legend! It's like, oh
Yeah.
my god, this is so
Well,
not
and but
NSFW.
it felt like so awesome to be a part of something, and I think, yeah, I do. I think back on those days, Lynn's, and I'm like, "Oh my god." Like, the thing I joke about with MTV is, like, the pay was terrible, but we got free booze at everything, and I just drank my weight in whatever. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
well, if you did the maths, I'm a millionaire, man, because there was but it was a part of this rebellious pop culture brand that we were so excited about being a part of.
Mhm.
And that, unfortunately, I think has been problematic for a lot of people that were there at the time. But in saying that, I'm glad I was there, because it was a real season that couldn't exist now. Some of the
Absolutely.
stuff that we did, you couldn't do now. Some of the
No
stuff we
way.
said, you couldn't do now. And so I feel like it holds a very special place in my heart, even though was definitely the place that I learned how to drink to succeed, really.
And it's interesting that you talk about kind of making up your salary in booze, because also in your book you speak about what alcohol has cost you, and you sort of did the math on like what it would
Yeah.
cost a year. And I kind of I had to I couldn't actually do that math. I was like, I don't want to know because
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
oh,
so I did that in the first year. So when I'd been sober for 1 year, I actually went back and I thought, and it's a guesstimate, but approximately what I would have spent on booze. If you include, like, I used to give friends of mine like a bottle of Moe or Verve for a birthday. I used to, you just, or a case of beer for a boy or whatever. And I did the maths over a year and it was about 10 grand, I
mm,
think, that I'd saved. And I'm like, well, let's go to Thailand on a holiday and drink coconuts, like,
yeah,
because that's a lot of money when and then people might hear that and go, "Oh my god, you must have been," but I'm just talking like that's probably a bit of an understatement on the average of what people would spend on booze, not including taxis, not including dry cleaning, right?
yeah,
So that is, it's a good hack for people who are motivated by finances to say, if you want to save money, quit drinking. Like, whatever motivates you to do it, it will
mm,
work for you. So if you are money driven, like, have a think about how much money you spend on alcohol and how much money you would save in 6 months or 12 months without it, and use that as your driver to be sober.
And you also speak about all of the physical things that it's cost you, from grazed knees, broken shoes,
God.
yeah, like broken bones was there on a ski trip when you had Kahlua on your cornflakes.
It was my Cocoa Pops.
Okay.
Yeah, and you think about, I spoke to this girl in Minnesota, on my podcast, and we talked about how, um, you after a big night drinking, you wake up with maybe a bruise here or a bruise there, and not going, "That's really bad that I don't remember how that happened." We just gloss over the fact that, like, our bodies have been injured.
Mm,
And I think I got out of it lightly, in the sense that I don't, I wasn't assaulted or abused when I was intoxicated. All of
mm,
my injuries were just like me, scaling fences in the middle of a paddock when we were on a farm,
right.
etcetera. But it does,
I remember that
like,
trip.
I one of the times. But when you look back on it, like, you go, "How was I behaving like that?" And I have no recollection of it. And the only way I know about it was because A, somebody told me, or B, I just assessed my body for damage and was like, "Oh, well, that must have been when." So this substance that we drink to connect with people, to feel relaxed, to celebrate, is impacting our memory bank
Mm,
on a regular basis, and no one is going, "Hey, that's a red flag," right? Like, if
mm,
we got to the end of this conversation and I was like, "Oh, geez, I do not remember a single thing that I said to Lindsay Rodriguez," that would be really problematic. But that's what happens on a really common night out for a lot of people, because of what alcohol does to our brains. And I don't think people think about booze in that way. But big bits of memory loss are not great. When you consider we want to go out with our friends to create memories,
mm.
and then we're robbing ourselves of the very thing that we want, right?
That's so true. And I think the other thing that's really problematic is that so many of the memories that we look back on, especially our generation, is like, oh, remember that time that Billy got so para? It was so funny. And it's this thing that is like one for the ages. It's like, yeah, but do you remember any conversations that you had? Do you remember what you were there for? And it's just like, no, it's just like we just remember the destruction and the people making fools of
Yeah.
themselves. And that's the thing that we kind of celebrate.
Yeah, it's really
On.
wild, and I think maybe it's a season of life thing too, Linz, like, as we get into our 40s, um oh, when did that happen? But
Oh,
especially for
me.
women, I've been here for a while, welcome to my club. But for women especially, like, when women hit midlife, their, progesterone levels drop off, and progesterone has an enzyme in it that helps to process alcohol through your body faster. So you hear women in midlife going, "Oh, my hangovers are worse than ever," and it's because our physical bodies do something in midlife that scream at us not to ingest poison. And that so there's actually like there's a physiological effect on women in midlife, and the fact that there are so many women in midlife drinking to cope with the bigness of all of the stuff that happens in midlife,
Mm.
and that our bodies are literally, like not helping us go down that road is again like a red flag on maybe there's another way to get through the bigness and the craziness of this season.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up because obviously we're a parenting lifestyle space. And I do feel like there's such a culture around parents needing alcohol to cope with raising kids. There's so many memes with where it's the mum with the giant wine glass, or there's that video that went viral of the little girl in the shopping trolley pointing at the wine bottles and saying, "Your water bottle, mummy." And
Yeah.
we look at these things and we laugh and we share them. We're like, oh, relatable. But it's
Yeah.
actually probably doing a lot of damage and reinforcing behavior that we should be trying to reframe. So what are your thoughts on that culture and how we could be better addressing the stresses of parenthood?
Yeah, I firstly want to do a disclaimer. Sobriety doesn't make your kids any less insane than what they are. So just everybody just understand this. If you get sober, your children are not going to become perfect. They will not stop throwing tantrums. Like your kids are your kids. But what we as parents need to do is find the capacity to hold space for them because they are on their L plates. And so to answer your question about the mummy wine culture, it actually does my head in, Linz. Those memes make me really angry and make me really upset because there are better ways that we can show up for ourselves and our kids than to lean into alcohol. But it's become such a lol and like so hilarious and so ingrained in parenting that we laugh it off. But I think when you look at the damage that alcohol does, it's not funny, and I do think we need to try and change that narrative. I've noticed lately, like probably, a few years ago, those memes would go around and it's a lot of laughing, crying emojis, like a lot of lols. And I've noticed in the comments a bit of a shift where for every couple of friends tagging their friend with the lols, there's one person going, "Hey guys, this is actually isn't funny. Did you know that drinking alcohol increases your risk of breast cancer? Did you know alcohol like depletes your cognitive function?" And just people actually getting a little bit wise about what alcohol does and kind of shifting the narrative a little bit to go, "Hey, can we try and find something else funny? Maybe it's time that we found something else funny or just like laughed at our kids because our kids are hilarious, not because we're drinking to cope with how stressful being a parent is."
And what was interesting, because in your book, obviously, you speak to a ton of different people who have also gone on their own journeys of sobriety. And you've got David Campbell, and there was a lady, I think it's the one from Minnesota, right? Is that Blair Sharp?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Minnesota. Yeah.
yeah, Minnesota. And then Irene, is it Falcone or Falcone?
Falcone.
Falcone, yeah, who co-founded Sans Drinks, which is just here in my neighborhood. And all of their stories were quite similar in that the thing that made them stop drinking was that sudden realization of the impact that it was having or could have on their kids.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, I think this is something that, like, obviously your son is 4, mine is 15 months old. So this kind of stuff is a long way off for us, thank goodness. But it's something that I think about now. Like, I'm
Mm.
realistic that my son will drink one day,
Yeah.
but I also want to create an environment for him where we can have really constructive conversations around responsible use of alcohol, because I don't want him to hurt himself. I don't want him to get into a car and something
100%.
goes terribly wrong. I don't particularly want to come in and find himself covered in his own vomit. So your son has never seen you have a drink, or your husband,
Yeah.
and it's a long way off. Have you sort of had any chats with your hubby or just in your own head about how you might in the future approach those chats about alcohol and responsible use of it in the future?
Yeah, I just don't want Henry to grow up, basically. I don't know how you feel about Kai, but I'm like, you know what? Just stay here for life with mummy and I'll protect you. But that's not how life works. So I have thought about it. I think, look, here's the good news. So the good news is the younger generations are drinking less. And
Mm,
I think it's because they're savvy. I think it's because they've looked at our generation and gone, what a pack of idiots. Let's not behave like that. That's really stupid. Why would
Yeah.
we do this?
Yeah.
It's like when your mum gets on Facebook and you're like, well, now I'm getting on Instagram because that's embarrassing. I honestly think that's what the younger generations think about binge drinking and grey area drinking. I also think the younger generations have bigger fish to fry in the sense of saving our environment and the climate change, and they have some really big deal problems to focus their attention on, which we didn't face as kids. Like, our biggest problem was like, oh, like my CD player broke, and like we just didn't have the big deal world stuff that I think the younger generations are going to need to solve. So I
Mm.
think that they're motivated in a different way, and I just think that I think they realize the truth about alcohol. So the hope there is that that will carry on, and that by the time our kids are circling around the ages of 15 or 16, that it isn't just a rite of social passage that you just go out and get blind at a party in someone's backyard. I think that I'm hoping that the ship will well and truly have been turned around by then.
Mhm.
So but in saying that, there are movies, there are TV shows, there are so many ways that alcohol is depicted in our society that our kids will pick up on whether or not they live in a dry house. So I guess my best thing that I'm thinking to do is to start the conversation early
Mhm.
and to be really open about it. And I think that that's the best thing we can do with our kids, is to be transparent. Now, as someone who's sober, my conversation is going to be really different with my kid than somebody who's currently struggling with their relationship with alcohol. And that's where I think it's going to be trickier for some parents to say, hey, I really don't want you to do this thing that I'm doing all the time,
Mm.
right? So
Mhm.
that's where I think the best parenting strategy is to figure out your relationship with alcohol first, get it in a place where it's in check and working for you, and then you're able to have a really honest and transparent conversation with your kid about it when it's time. The other thing I will say is, if we're being really honest about alcohol, so here's the pitch to your child when they're a teenager. There's a drink in front of you, it has alcohol in it. But here's the thing. Alcohol is an A1 carcinogen in humans, which means it is cancer causing. It's the same stuff that asbestos has been labeled as the smoking bans are all about. It is an A1 carcinogen. It is scientifically proven to increase your risk of at least 11 types of cancer. Now, do you want to have that drink? And most people would say no.
Mm.
And that is a fact. It's the truth about alcohol that we're not talking about enough. And then, you could go along that road and say, hey, here's a glass of alcohol, but this is what it does to your neural pathways in your brain. Here's a glass of alcohol. This is what it's going to do to your indigestion. Here's a glass of alcohol. Here's what it's going to potentially do to your behavior, your relationships, your body, your physiology, your cognitive function. Like, there's so many negative impacts that alcohol has on us. I don't even know why it's allowed in society after studying it for so long, to be honest. But I
Yeah.
think that probably a really great place for parents to talk with their children about alcohol, is to explain the truth about what that substance is. So while they might be getting the narrative from their friends and their peers of like, oh, but it's just a drink and it's just this and it's just a party, like understanding what that thing that we're ingesting is going to do to us, I think will give them a better chance at making an educated decision. And so
Mm.
that would probably be my strategy. Yeah.
Okay. Love that. And I think there's probably, I know for me in the past, there's definitely been a link between drinking and feelings of self-worth. And you talk about it in your book as well, imposter syndrome, feeling like you
Yeah.
don't deserve certain good things that happen to you. I
Mm.
think in parenting, we're constantly feeling like we're failing. Could I have done that better? Am I showing up the best I possibly can for my kid? You go to
Yeah.
bed and just go, oh God, like, is my kid as happy as they could be, or
Oh
whatever.
my
So yeah, do
God.
you think that maybe parents do also drink more because we are constantly feeling like I'm not doing this right? And how do we reframe that
100%.
if so?
I 100% agree with you, Linz, and I feel you and I see you. I've had those nights where I'm in my room crying my eyes out going, I failed my kid. And it's because I snapped. And then he was like, Mum, you're not my best friend anymore. And I was like, I know that's the most hurtful thing that you can say, right? But you know what? First of all, I just want to say it's okay if our kids aren't happy all the time
Mm.
because we are allowed to experience sadness. And it is more about helping your kids sit in sadness and process it. I don't know if you've seen the movie Inside Out, but it was written by psychologists over 4 years, and that movie, I think, has helped me as an adult articulate that sadness isn't bad or wrong. Sadness is a part of our lives, and it's from sadness that happiness can come.
Mm.
Much like with my grieving journey, my dad passed away a year ago, and so tragic and sad, but out of my love for my dad, despite how complicated our relationship was, came the grief. And without the love, the grief doesn't exist, and they're one in the same. And so the first thing that I, have really tried to go on a journey with is just understanding that it's okay for Henry to have feelings that aren't just happiness, because happiness isn't it's not real. We can't just be happy all the time,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
also don't get what we want all the time. And without saying to your 4-year-old, life isn't fair. And
Mm.
so I think a better choice can be showing up and teaching them vulnerability and resilience through our own vulnerability and resilience. And if we're drinking to suppress our feelings of inferiority or imposter syndrome or failing as a mum, we are not showing up as our vulnerable best selves. And so, how can we teach our children to sit in those emotions if we are avoiding them by drinking? So, there's probably a really deep response, but I'm so passionate about this. And I think too, because I have been on a journey with it myself. And not to say that there hasn't been a moment where I've gone, oh my God, parenting's really hard. I really wish I drank. Because I'm sober and I'm so sold on my sobriety, I'm like, oh my God, parenting's really hard. I really wish I had the answers, which is the same thing, right? I
Yeah.
just know that I'm not going to find them at the bottom of a barrel or a barrel of whiskey or a bottom of a bottle
That's what you're
or
thinking.
whatever.
It
No
works.
judgment. No judgment on quantity.
No.
I champagne bottle with a straw. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that it is, yeah, I just know I know how hard it is because I'm in the parenting trenches, right? But I also know that it's possible to do this without alcohol, and I just really believe that your best self isn't a drunk one. The
Mhm.
best mum that you can be is one who is willing to face the hard stuff and sit in the hard stuff yourself, so that then you can sit in the hard stuff with your kid and go, "You know what? Mummy's being brave right now." And I think that was one thing that when my dad passed away, and I was obviously incredibly sad, and I have a very empathetic son, and he said to me one day, like maybe a week or so after my dad had passed away, like, "Oh, mum, are you sad again?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sad because, my dad died, like grandpa died." And he's like, "That was last week." Yeah, I'm still sad. And
Yeah.
that's just to be able to explain, like, I didn't just get over it. It's a real, it's a bit of a process here, but I
Mm.
think, the real world stepping that stuff out is going to show our kids how to be resilient and to not have to drink themselves out of their problems when they're older.
Yeah, well, something that I found really powerful in your book was where you wrote a letter to alcohol as though it was a person. And you sort of explained to alcohol all the ways that it has just been a really shitty part of your life. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, if that was a person, you would not
Yeah.
want anything to do with that person. Everyone around you would be saying, like, if it was a boyfriend, right? Be like, break up with that guy, he's a deadbeat. If it was a friend, be like, that friend is toxic. So I think that's such
Yeah.
a powerful tool for people who may be unsure of like where to start, but know that something needs to change.
Yeah, and I think I landed on that because I kept saying things like, "Oh, my relationship with alcohol." And I'm like, "Oh, it's a relationship." I'm like, "Let's unpack that a little bit." And you think about how we relate to other people and you have, you know, good relationships and you know what a good relationship looks like. And so when I personified alcohol, I was like, "Oh dear Lord, this is so toxic. Like this is worse than the worst of relationships." And so if this was a person, everybody in my inner sanctum would be saying, "Get away and do not respond." And I'm like, oh, well, it kind of makes it easier to go sober when you realize that this thing that we are so attached to and driven by is so bad for us. And I also think that there is a space to grieve alcohol in a way when you stop drinking because it has been a part of your world. It certainly was for me. It saw me through some dark times, but man, it saw me through some great times as well.
Mhm.
And I think that, there was a sense of like, oh, I don't miss that, but there is something missing right now, and I'm gonna try and fill it with something better for me, more positive for me, that's going to help me on my journey, not take me away from my purpose.
Yeah, and allow you to retain some really great memories rather than be like, "Oh, I think that was a great night or a great
Yeah,
interview."
I think we had a good time. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, the bruise on my knee would say otherwise, but like, yeah, it's fine. Well, look, obviously, Dry July is coming up, so I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are contemplating giving it a red hot
Mm,
crack, whether it's just because they want to take a month off or explore something deeper or raise money for
yeah.
charity. What words of wisdom do you have for those people?
So many words of wisdom. Firstly, I would never not encourage somebody to take some time off alcohol. I just think any time off alcohol is a good time. Um, but I would encourage people to set an intention of exploring their sober self rather than just trying to get through a month of life without booze. And I think the outcome will be a little bit more positive if you do set that agenda. So, absolutely tap into Dry July, absolutely take the month off, absolutely fundraise. I think what they stand for is so wonderful. They help adults living with cancer have a better experience, and having just lost a best mate to cancer, I cannot support their efforts more. In saying that, if you have the intention of sobriety as that overarching theme, it's gonna be a different experience, and I think that that's the one I want people to have. So rather than just avoid alcohol for a month for a good cause, you can dig in and still do the 30 days, but actually go on a progressive revelation of sobriety, and I think you're gonna get to August and you might be in a position where you're like, "Huh, let's see what else we can uncover. What other tools can I put in my sobriety toolkit?"
Excellent. And yeah, and you give people a lot of those tools in this book. I really like that you're very realistic about the fact that quitting drinking, even if it's just for a month or whether your intentions are longer term than that, like it's not going to be easy. You'll be tired.
So
You'll want to
hard.
cry a lot.
So much
You'll
crying.
want
Get some
to,
tissues.
sorry,
So much crying. Get some tissues.
so much crying. And you'll
So
have to
much.
answer some pretty insensitive questions from people as well who might not understand why you're no longer doing this thing that you have
Yeah,
previously done. But you cover all of that in your book. It's such a
I
great way
do.
to set people up for success.
Thanks, babe. And one thing I would say if you are gonna do Dry July, like the one big bit of advice is figure out what your sober response is gonna be. I call it sober response, which is just if somebody says to you, "Hey, can I get you a drink?" Like, what do you say when you're not drinking without it being, like, super weird or having, like, grown men yell at you for not doing tequila shots, by way of random example? And having a sober response is just a really clear, succinct explanation that you can deliver and then just mic drop it. So, it might be, "Oh, I'm just not drinking at the moment for health reasons." And then shut up.
Mm.
And usually what happens is the other person will be like, "Okay, sweet. Can I get you a water then?" Because what I did, and I wish that I had have figured this out earlier, but in my early sobriety is I like over explained and apologized heavily. So I was like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm just not drinking at the moment." It's not like I had a problem with alcohol or anything, although there was that time that I lost my shoe. But other than that, and you just go on this like complete defense of why you're not drinking, and you don't have to defend your sobriety to anybody because this is about you and your relationship with alcohol. So my encouragement is just to have a real think about just that little mic drop that you can have, and that's going to safeguard you a little bit.
And do not apologize, right? We should never apologize for doing things that are
Right.
serving us so much better.
I am not sorry for not drinking.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild though, isn't it? The way that we sort of feel like we almost have to be like, oh, I know, like, no, what a bummer. Like, I'm not doing this thing that was like slowly killing me. Like, sorry, sorry for
It is,
impacting your one.
I think it's like, and maybe this is like another chat we can have, Linz, but something that I've been thinking about lately is this. the people pleasing DNA that I have, which was
Mm.
from when I was a little girl. It's like, hug your grandmother. It's like, well, I don't wanna. I'm like, yeah, but you need to because she's your grandmother. I'm like, yeah, but
Mm.
she's old and stinks. Not that, you know what I mean? Like, but from a really young age, I had drilled into me like, be a good girl, be a good girl. And I think that that has not necessarily been the best wiring in my brain because it did for so long when I was actually doing good for myself. I felt like I had to apologize for it because it didn't align with society, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a thing there where we do need to stop apologizing, or over apologizing. Like if you've been a dick, yes, say sorry. But
Mm.
I mean, over apologizing for stuff that we shouldn't really be sorry for. And sobriety is definitely one of those things.
100%. And we shouldn't also, our other people's comfort factor should not play into the choices that we
Mm,
make for ourselves. And I think, well, I
yeah.
would assume that when you decide to no longer have alcohol be a part of your life, it makes other people uncomfortable because it plants that seed in their own mind of like, well, she's doing it. Like, should I? Like, well, hang on, like
Yeah.
drink the same amount. So, like, if she is stopped because maybe she felt that it was problematic, am I problematic? And
Yeah.
that's their journey to go on. And again, I encourage them to read your book and listen to your podcast, which is also called Last Drinks. But
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's not something that we or you or anyone should be like, oh, okay, no, I'll have one, so that it kind of like quiets that little voice in your head.
But I do think that for a long time, I did that. Like, when if I was giving myself a bit of a break, but
Mm,
somebody would be like, "Oh, just have one." Oh, I've been that person, like, "Just have one." And
yeah.
it's like, "Oh, okay. Why not just have one?" Because you just don't wanna have the confrontation, or you don't wanna feel like you're letting someone down. It's the
Yeah,
people pleasing thing
it
again. It's
is.
like, "Oh,
That was a
well,
scene.
if I have one, then you won't feel like I've let you down. So I'll have a drink even though I don't want to." Like that's the denial of self. And so that's like a whole other like thing that we can get into. But what I wanted to say just quickly on the book is just on that, like how your choices can be quite triggering and confronting for other people. My dear friend Osher Ginsburg has a quote on the front of the book, and it says, "If you are resistant to opening this book, then this is the book for you." And I think if anyone has been listening to this chat and they're like, "Oh, like it just feels slightly uncomfortable, like how I feel when someone blows up a balloon next to me, like I feel slightly uncomfortable, like it's gonna explode." And I'm just, if you're feeling like that, then I think you should lean in and dig in, because this book will probably help you find some sort of resolution.
Absolutely. And you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So,
Yeah.
and you've got a fantastic sober BFF in Maz Compton who will talk you through it. So